Hi and welcome to the Art of Creating. In this video, we are going to talk about wet-on-wet technique in watercolor. In this video, I'm going to show you a few examples how I've actually used this technique while doing this painting. Wet-on-wet technique is basically applying wet paint onto wet paper. So in this first example, that's what I'm doing with the top part of the sky. I have applied clean water to the top portion of the sky, and while the paper is still wet, I've started dropping in the color. At this stage, you're basically dropping in the color and watching the color spread on the paper, and you can keep adding the color, keep adding darker colors or a variety of colors depending on the look that you're trying to achieve. This is a great technique to have a smooth blend between the different colors because the paper remains wet, which means the edges of the different paints that you apply will blend in together. And you won't have a harsh transition or line visible between the two colors or multiple colors. While that section is still a little bit wet, you can add the next section that you want to paint in. So in this case, I'm showing you a lower portion of the sky. I've done the same thing, applied clean water to the lower portion of the sky and started adding in the color. Because our top part was still a little bit wet, you could see how the color started blending into the new section that I've applied water to, and that created a smooth transition between the two parts of the painting. In the next example, I'm going to show you how I have used this technique while painting a cloud. So I've started with a wet on dry technique, therefore I've applied wet paint onto dry paper. However, as I was painting it and as the paper was starting to dry, I've realized I wanted to intensify the colors and darken the top part of the sky. So while my first layer was still wet, I've applied another layer of paint on top of it, and it created a smooth blend between the different layers and between the two portions of the cloud. Just a quick break to let you know that if you want to follow along and paint this sunset, the course is now available on Skillshare. Not only I have step-by-step instructions on how to create the sunset landscape, but it also includes some exercises that you can practice to get better at those particular techniques that I have used throughout this course, and it will also give you skills to apply to your own future paintings. Skillshare is a platform for creatives and it includes a whole lot of courses on a variety of subjects. You can take courses in art, in creative writing, and much more. If you use my link below in the description box, you can get 2 months free premium membership, and that gives you access to all of the courses on Skillshare platform. Now let's get back to the video. The next example is me painting the mountains. So as I've applied the color onto the mountain, I kept adding more and more color, intensifying it and darkening it at the top. And that gave me the time to keep adding texture as well. One of the advantages of using this technique is that because the paint remains wet, it is much easier to remove than if the paint was already dry on the paper. So while the paint is still wet, you can see me in this example here, picking up some extra color that I didn't want. Basically, that part of the mountain got a little bit too dark with my paint, so I wanted to remove it and lighten it. So I've just used a clean brush and removed that color. You can also use a bit of a tissue or a paper towel and get the same effect, but I find with a brush you've got a bit more control, especially if it's a small area that you want to tidy up. In our next example, I'm showing you how I've used this technique in the ground portion of the painting. This technique doesn't necessarily have to be used using paint on top of water. You can use a light wash of color on your page and then add paint on top of it, providing that your first layer is still wet. You basically get the same effect, except your paper is going to be a bit tinted with the color that you've used for our base layer. So for this technique to be effective, of course, you need to work fairly quickly. You lay down the first wash of color, which is generally your lightest color or your lightest shade, in that section of the painting. And then you start adding various textures, lines, markings, shadows, basically just defining the areas of the painting. And while the paper is still wet, you can see that the transitions are fairly smooth. The more the paper dries, the more you can see the markings become more defined and you can start adding the details. If for some reason your painting has dried too quickly and you weren't able to add enough paint or enough sections of the painting that you wanted to cover in this initial layer, the best thing to do is to wait until this whole section is completely dry and then you go over it with a second layer. And this is exactly what we're going to do here. In the sky, I wanted to intensify and smooth out some colors. So to do this and make sure that you're not going to have any harsh edges and transitions between the first layer and our new layer, you need to wet the whole area again with clean water, making sure that when you apply the water with your brush, you do it very lightly and you don't want to disturb the color that's already underneath in your first layer. Watercolor is a water activated medium. Therefore, when you start putting water on top of your first layer, you will reactivate that color. That's why if you keep scrubbing at it, you will create bold patches. We need to add our water very lightly on the top and then start adding our color in exactly the same way as we did with our first layer. That's basically it. I hope you have learned something and this technique is a little bit less of a mystery to you. If you've got any questions, drop them in the comment section, and if you want to see more videos from me in the future, click subscribe button and I will see you in my next video.